Asher and Lazarus, and we are at the end of February, Black History Month, and we have not talked anything in terms of Black history through the course of the month. So my apologies for those maybe who were anticipating or excited about having some time devoted to that. I will try to make good, at least in one respect, for today to have some emphasis and some focus there. So I picked the topic Asher and Lazarus, and I will say first off that the Asher that we're going to talk about is not the Asher that you're probably thinking about. All right, the Asher that you probably are thinking about in the Bible is the eighth son of Jacob, second son of Leah, whose name means blessed and happy, and that was, of course, the name that had been given because she thought that certainly that this would bring blessedness and happiness, and so this is the eighth son that is there. Lazarus, of course, you think about in the New Testament, you start seeing Lazarus appear, and we see, of course, Lazarus, who was a friend of Jesus, who Jesus raised from the dead after he had been deceased for 4 days and brought him back to life. And we also see another instance of a person named Lazarus in another story. So today I've chosen then the topic of Asher and Lazarus, and the Asher that we're talking about is the liberty that I have taken to name this person Asher. The person we're talking about doesn't have a name that's being affixed that's given to him in the scriptures. And so it would be a lot easier, instead of me saying that man or the rich man or this person, to be able to call him a name. So the name I chose and landed on is Asher. So you might have a different name that you want to use, and by all means, it doesn't matter because we're talking about the same person. And then another person we do know that has a name, and the name is given, and this is again, not the person's name per se, but the name that Jesus gave this person. And I think that in giving the name to this person, it was simply to be able to help the people that were hearing the story to follow on. It would get a little confusing saying this man and this person, that person. So it would be a little easier to give them names so that you know exactly who is being referred to when they're being spoken of. So we're talking about the parable that you will find in Luke of the rich man and Lazarus. And looking at the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, again, I'm not focusing in on every particular that is there in the narrative and in the story, but we're only looking at certain pieces of that story, of what it means and what it represents, the rich man and Lazarus. Now, as I look at it today, I'm looking from the perspective of Black history, but I also want to look in the context on which Jesus shared it and the meaning behind it. So the first thing I will share as we look at it is I'm not looking in objectively to the quote, the doctrinal explanation. Like, meaning, we're going to look at it at face value, is Jesus gave it in the understanding that the hearers would have walked away from, because that's how we should really approach Scripture, is what was he saying, or what was the teacher bringing forth? How did it drive the hearers? How did it impact them? And then from that, of course, then we'll be able to, if we do our due diligence, we'll be able to make an application then maybe to ourselves. We'll be able to make an application that will be appropriate, but it all starts, of course, with being able to see what was the initial piece that was given, what did it mean, what does it represent, why was it stated. Those things become very important to us to be able to see and to know and to be able to understand in talking about it. So the parable that Jesus gave. Now, Proverbs chapter 22, before we start, in Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 22, we read the following, Proverbs chapter 22, and in verse 22 and 23, Proverbs says this: "Do not rob the poor because he is poor, nor oppress the afflicted at the gate. For the Lord will plead their cause and plunder the soul of those who plunder them. As you know, as we're going through Proverbs, we have learned that it's really about probabilities. Like if you do this, this will be the outcome. If you do that, this will be the outcome. So if you seek God and the fear of God and you combine it with wisdom, then overall, you're going to do well. If you don't seek God, you have folly and you combine it with foolishness by rejecting wisdom, you're going to do poorly. Just a general rule of life in terms of probability. And amongst these proverbs that are given, this one is one that I like. It says, don't rob the poor because he's poor. Or don't take advantage of somebody because of their situation. Like, because you can take advantage of them, don't do it. So he wants Israel to be different. And tying it back into, of course, the ceremonial law and the civil laws and the reforms that Israel had, they were to be different from the nations that were around them. Other nations had laws, so don't think that Israel was the only nation that had laws, because that's not the case. And I'm specifically referring to God bringing them out of Egypt. There were other nations that had laws that they abode by. But those laws were not as encompassing as what the laws were that God gave Israel. He was protecting them in so many particulars that the laws of the nations that are around them failed to do so. It's like today. Most would say that America is the place that has like the best laws. Again, that's debatable, okay? But people would say the laws of America are the best. But other people that does not mean that other countries don't have laws. It's just people saying, well, I like American laws the best because of this, this, and the other. Now, when we look at ancient Israel, it's not a case of saying, well, we like their laws the best, but their laws were specifically given to them by Jehovah. All the nation's laws that were around them were laws that people collectively had put together for themselves. And that didn't make them good, didn't make them bad, but we certainly can't compare them apples to apples with respect of the law of God. Like the laws that God gave them, this is the instruction I want you to live by. This is how I want you to carry yourselves. This is how you will interact one with another as a nation of individuals and collectively as a nation to represent me. And so there were certain nuances. In particular, I highlight this one of the care for the poor and those who were destitute. So some nations had laws for them, some did not. And so maybe look at nations around the world today. There are some nations that may have laws for the poor, and there are other nations that may not have laws for the poor. And you might say, well, I like that nation better because it does, or maybe I don't like that nation because it does not. So in this case, he says, do not rob the poor because he is poor. And think of the poor not solely as a person lacking monetary means. More times than not, when we read in the scriptures about someone being poor, we think of, okay, no money in their pocket. And that's not the main impact that it's talking about. It is really, it can describe the resources or the lack thereof, but it also is encompassing like broken down in spirit, like broken in heart, downtrodden, destitute, beat down, having a tough road to hoe. So he says, do not rob the poor because they are poor. They would not generally have someone to be able to speak up for them, to make a wrong right. They'll have no one to be able to appeal to, no authority to be able to reference and to go to in normal society. So he says, do not rob the poor because they are poor, neither oppress the afflicted in the gate. Now, when we think about the gate, that was a place where they would come in to where the elders would meet. Right? They would sit down and have counsel together and talk and be able to look over various things happening amongst the people and so forth. And yes, there were courts that were established in terms of the judiciary, and you had priests, but the gates would be a place of meeting and being able to talk and to reconcile, to restore, to bring judgment, to bring order. So he says, don't rob the afflicted that's in the gate. So person that is going in to try to be able to bring forth the case, do not oppress them when they're seeking to be able to find relief. Because if you do, the Lord will plead their cause and spoil the soul of those that spoiled them. So big picture was that Jehovah cares for the poor, and that Jehovah cares for those that are oppressed and that are afflicted, and that he will plead their cause. That was like part and parcel of people who were in Israel. Their economy established that on the seventh year was like that year of Jubilee, the year of release. Remember that would happen every 7 years. So that they got in over their heads. In the 7th year, the year of release, was like a clean slate. Now, you might say, hey, I like that law. We don't have a law like that today, except if you file bankruptcy in America. Right? So in America, you can go in like deep in debt and struggle trying to pay bills and not being able to find relief. And if the lien or so forth, if the collection sits dormant for 7 years, then it goes away. Now, you can also find relief, though, by saying, I'm going to file bankruptcy, and that would be like equivalent to that jubilee, not the exact same thing, but similar in that the slate is wiped away. You say, I'm going to file bankruptcy. I can't pay it. I really would like to pay it, but I just can't. Through misfortune, through sickness, through job loss, through the loss of a spouse, through a family change, whatever it could have been the reason behind it, you can say, I am leaving it. I'm filing bankruptcy on it. And so that's a clean slate. Israel had this every 7 years. Also for the poor, one other piece that you remember, they would have the tithe that would be taken up, would be shared with the poor. And then they also had the right of gleaning, that they could go in the field after the farmers had gone through the field and picked whatever was left. The gleaners could come back and they could glean. So if you had an apple tree and you went over the apple tree, once you had passed the branches, whatever was left was for the poor, for the destitute, for those who were widows and orphans and those who were foreigners and strangers that needed sustenance. They could come back and they could glean it. So you imagine you had your orchard field and you sent out the workers to do it. You certainly want them to do a good job. The instruction was not leave stuff on the field, on the tree. That was not the idea. Okay? The idea was to glean the harvest, make sure you took everything in. But the reality is that you have different leaves up that may obscure. So you clean it and you gather it, and then the following day, maybe you may go out and the sun is sitting in a different spot and you look up and like, oh man, we missed like 15 apples there. I think of it maybe in your respect of cleaning a mirror, and you spray the Windex on or whatever their solution is, and you wipe it, and it looks, and you say, okay, it's clean, and then you step away and you look from another angle, and you see what? Sometimes you see streaks in there, right? And so you come back and you redo it again, and you may step to another side until you don't see streaks. So think of the streaks in as being like the fruit that was left there. You're not intentionally leaving it there. You thought you did a good job, but as you step away and you look, you realize, oh, hey, there's a spot that's there. Let me go back and clean that. So they could not come back again and re-clean the tree. It was for those who were in need. So that was a part of the fabric of their society. And so with that knowledge that's there, that sets us up for the story that we're looking at. And one other piece I'll also add into the story as you consider it, as they were contemplating it, was the reality that they also knew that there were some who would always be poor. Because Jesus said in the New Testament, he said, the poor you have with you always. All right? So they would not be able to change that situation for whatever reason or another. He said, the poor you have with you always, but show compassion, show mercy unto them. So let's look at how his story plays out. So in Luke chapter 16, the Bible says that there was a certain rich man which fared sumptuously, and he was in fine linen. And there was a certain beggar whose name was Lazarus. And again, I'm going to call it a rich man Asher. That's not his name, just a name that I'm giving. But Jesus gave the name of the beggar. He assigned the name Lazarus. The beggar's name is Lazarus. And Lazarus was laid at his gate, or Asher's gate. Speaking of the condition of Lazarus, he was full of sores, and he desired to be fed with the crumbs which fell from Asher's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. So imagine just like in that first little setup, you have like two contrasts there. You have one, a rich man who has fine linen and who's dressed in purple. And again, those aren't bad things, right? It's not an indictment saying that because he is wealthy, this is an issue. Wealth is not the issue. Wealth is not being condemned, and poverty is not being extolled. That's not the issue here. You find out what the issue is as we go a little bit further. But in it, though, here is Asher, and he is doing well, and he is faring well, and Lazarus is at his gates. And the condition of Lazarus at his gates is that he is full of sores, and he just wants to be able to eat something that falls from the rich man's table. And so horrible of a condition is he in, meaning Lazarus, that on his body, the dogs are coming and they're licking the sores. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with dogs, personally speaking. Love relationship is, dogs like to go out, run, do different things, they fetch and so forth. That's like that. Hate relationship I have with dogs is that some dogs, they like to lick you. Now, you might like that. Now, some kids and adults, they like the dogs licking their face. And, hey, knock yourself out. Just not me, right? I don't like that. If I'm wearing shorts and I don't want the dog on my leg, no, Do not want your saliva on me. Now, amplify that if you had sores. And Lazarus has these sores. Now, we don't know whether the dog licking the sores actually makes him feel better, or the dog licking the sores makes him worse. It's just given to us that this is his condition. He has these sores on his body, and he's unable to move himself. The dog comes in, and the dog licks him. So I would imagine the dog is seeking to bring comfort, because that's kind of the nature of dogs, not to torment, but to bring comfort. So he's bringing his sort of comfort, and he's licking the beggar every day. Now, notice what the rest of the text says. It says, and it came to pass that the beggar died, or Lazarus died, and he was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. Now, let's backtrack just for a moment and step out of the story and give some of the backdrop of it. Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, according to the previous verses. And as he's talking to the Pharisees, he's not giving them a parable on doctrinal things. This is not like a quote, a parable on life after death, or what happens when you die. A lot of times we look at it through the lens of, all right, well, we're going to break it apart, and this happened here, this is not the case, and so forth. Again, I would ask you to separate that for a moment and just step into what the environment in which Jesus was sharing it. In the environment in which he was sharing it, people believed that when you died, you went straight to heaven. They believed in the immediate afterlife, that you would go straight there, okay? If that were not the case, then the story wouldn't make sense to them. So I want to repeat that just so you can contemplate it for a moment. The hearers that were hearing the story, many of them believed that you immediately went to heaven upon death. All right, so we understand overall scripture teaching about life and death, what happens when you die versus when you're alive. But many of them believe that, okay, when you die, you go straight to heaven. Or you go into the pit, never to return. Jesus doesn't come and teach them in this parable, this is what happens and this is what doesn't happen. But as a great teacher, he leans into their understanding and he presents a story to challenge them within the framework of their understanding. Does that make sense? Like, he doesn't correct their wrong. But he takes what they understand and says, okay, this is what you believe. I'm going to give you a story that is woven around the framework of your story, and I want to challenge your heart's understanding and condition. So how does he do it? He says that this is a rich man who has everything that he wants in life. Here is Lazarus, who doesn't have anything that he wants in life. They stay in this condition for a period of time, and here is Lazarus just right on the outside of the opulent lifestyle of Asher, who has absolutely nothing. It happens that Lazarus dies and he's carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. And Asher also dies and he's buried. And in hell he lifts up his eyes, being in torment, and he seeth Abraham afar off, and he sees Lazarus in his bosom. And he says, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. So in the story now that Jesus is telling, both men die. All right, Lazarus dies, and Lazarus is in the bosom of Abraham. Asher dies, and he is being tormented with flames. He is uncomfortable in his condition, in his predicament. And he looks up and beholds in his eyes, he sees Father Abraham. Now, of course, in our setting of where it is, Abraham, it would be the father of the Jewish nation, right? He's the father of the faithful. So he sees then the father of the faithful, and he cries out to him, would you have mercy on me and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool me off because I'm being tormented by the flames. Abraham said to him, son, remember that in life you receive good things, and likewise Lazarus received evil things. But now he is comforted and you're tormented. So really we're seeing like a reversal of what life was in death then, all right? So we're seeing in life, Asher was comforted, Lazarus was tormented, and there's an exact flip that takes place in death. In death, Asher is tormented and Lazarus is comforted. And he says, and besides all this, that between us and you there is this great gulf that is fixed, so that they which would pass from us to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that will come from thence. So meaning it's this big chasm between us and between you. So nobody from here can go over there, and no one from there can come over here. All right? But obviously he's able to hear the talking from one place to the next. And he says that then he said, I pray thee, he meaning the rich man, said, I pray you, Father, that thou wouldest send him, meaning Lazarus, to my father's house. All right? Now, this kind of gets a little, dare I say, mystical for those of like with the normal understanding of, okay, the state of the dead, right? Again, I want you to just put that aside and grab it from the perspective of the mindset of the hearers. All right. So what they're hearing is that, wait a minute, there's a rich man and there's this poor man, and the rich man has all these different things in life. The poor man has nothing. The rich man dies, and the rich man doesn't get to go to heaven. The rich man goes to hell. And the poor man doesn't go to hell, but the poor man goes to heaven. And why is that important? Because again, in the natural understanding, one would look at the platitudes and the wealth that the rich man had in life as a sign that God had blessed him. And just as God had blessed him in life, so God would bless him in death. And for the poor man, they looked at suffering, many looked at suffering as a sign of being forsaken of God. You have done something to offend God. You've done something to bring the calamities of God upon you. You're not living right. You're not eating right. You're not doing something about you is not right, because if you were right, you would be blessed. Because you're not blessed, then God has forsaken you. And so therefore, if God has forsaken you in life, the conclusion would be God has forsaken you in death. But the parable, or the teaching that Jesus is saying, he's saying, wait a minute, stop, pump the brakes. You thought Lazarus was going to heaven, and the poor man, or rather Lazarus was going to hell, and the rich man, Asher, is going to heaven. But the reality is just the inverse. That's not what is happening. Now, the rich man continues to plead, and he says, Father Abraham, would you at least send Lazarus then? If you will not send him to bring me comfort, please send him to my father's house. All right? Send him to my father's house, because I have 5 brothers that are there. And the thought would be then that my brothers are doing the same things in life that I did in life. Give them a warning so that they would stop what they're doing and change their ways. Right? That's what's implied from what he is saying. He says, go forth to them, I have 5 brethren. Let him testify to them, lest they also come into this place of torment. So Abraham said unto him, they have Moses and they have the prophets. Right? They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. Now, of course, we talk about Moses and the prophets. What Jesus is talking about really is saying, like, okay, they have the law. So Moses is the one that was giving the law, like the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, that we would call Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They had that. And then the prophets were like the Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Lamentations, and so forth, all the minor prophets. That's like the law and the prophets. He's saying they have that. Let them go back and to read that. Let them go back and to study that. Let them go back and to behold that they have the scriptures of the Torah available unto them. Let them obey that, because again, hearing was not just hearing it, but hearing it was also obeying that. So let them obey what Moses and the prophets have said. And he said, nay, Father Abraham, meaning the rich man or Asher said, nay, Father Abraham, but if one went to them from the dead, that will make them change. Right? If one goes to them that was dead, they will have the testimony to make my brothers change. So he says, and he said to him, meaning Abraham said to them, if they don't hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. Okay? So again, a lot that is there, and I'll unpack, of course, some of the actual meaning in just a moment. But again, you're there, you're hearing it, and the Pharisees are hearing it, and if you believe in life after death, really, what is he doing? He's challenging the supposition. Not about challenging about life after death, but he's challenging the supposition, are you really going to where you think you're going? That's really the question he's asking. It's like, okay, I'm not going to argue with you over the state of the dead. That's not the point that he's making here. The point is are you going where you think you are going? Because the Pharisees would say that, the rich man, he should be able to go to heaven. Why? Because of the blessings that he had enjoyed. And the beggar, Lazarus, should go to the grave, should go to hell because of the curse that he had enjoyed in this life. But Jesus is challenging that and just throwing that out. And he's saying, are you going where you think you're going? I said I would share in the context, I wanted to share a story in terms of black history. And so I chose this story in the context of black history. Frederick Douglass, of course, you know, is a former slave and would become an abolitionist. And of the stories and so forth in scriptures that slaves would become accustomed to, there were different ones. They did not have like a Bible that they could go and read. Again, slavery was, or rather reading was illegal for a slave. For a slave to know how to read was certain death. Because a well-read slave would be a useless slave. The slave master feared that if the slaves were able to read, then they would want freedom. They would not be content in the state that they were in. They thought that they were just brutes and animals and creatures just to be able to work, to be able to be beaten, to be able to be bred, to be able to be bought and sold. They had no feelings that they could not comprehend. So why teach this illiterate, ignorant slave to read? Because that would just cause them to be discontented in life. And after all, they can't change the color of their skin. They'll never enjoy all the luxuries that we enjoy simply because of the virtue of the color of our skin. Of course, not only could slaves not read, but they also could not write. They were forbidden to write. To know how to be able to read, to know how to be able to write, it was again against the law. And to teach a slave to read or to write was against the law. But they heard these stories that would come from those who were abolitionists or those who were sympathetic to blacks. And they would share and they would begin to bring in different passages and such. Now, of course, there were some slave owners who wanted their slaves to go to church, and they wanted them to go to church to hear the passages read to say, like, slaves, obey your masters. They wanted them to hear that. I wanted them to be able to hear a passage that said that the servant that knew his master's will and did it not shall be beaten with few stripes, but the servant that knew his master's will and did it not shall be beaten with many stripes. So they wanted to use the scriptures to be able to cherry pick selectively the ideas that they wanted them to espouse. As the slaves would hear some of the other stories, though, they would make certain connections. Like there are a lot of allusions and similarities that they made between the stories. Like, right, they read about the Israelites in slavery in Egypt, and that didn't take any like figuring out. They saw a link between the slaves in Egypt and their plight. They saw a commonality between the brutality that the Egyptians showed to the Hebrews and the brutality that the slave masters were showing to them. And they saw then that the Egyptians, or rather the Israelites, cried out to God, and God heard their cry, and he remembered them and raised up a deliverer named Moses. And it's again not ironic that you have many, and one in particular, who was called like the Moses of our people. And they read about crossing over the Jordan River. And they also had their own rivers that they would have to ford to be able to cross over, to be able to make it to the promised land. And they saw about the stories of triumph and deliverance. And so certainly those stories resonated with God, of the judgments and the destruction that will come upon Egypt to be able to free them. And they saw that in the revolution that was taking place with James Brown and the rising of the Civil War and all those different things, the hand of God working to deliver them in the same capacity. But they would hear these stories. And so other stories that they would also hear that they heard that really resonated well with them was the story of the prodigals, not the prodigal son, but the Good Samaritan. They also reminisce in this story that we're looking at of the rich man Lazarus. Now, it's interesting to think that as they were hearing these stories, that some of these like struck deep in their chord. And I would ask respectfully, when I look through, none of the stories are the thematic experiences of prophecy, Daniel or Revelation, like registered on their list. And that is not diminishing the impact of Daniel or Revelation. But I want to highlight that what resonated with them were the stories of what they were going through that they could identify with. So when they heard the stories here, like so for instance, Daniel 2, we have the head of gold, the chest of silver, and all the way through until like the rock smashes the image and it destroys it into 1,000 pieces. That's true. And it is a powerful perspective of prophecy. But what resonated and stuck within their psyche and their soul was a story like this about the rich man and Lazarus. And why? How would it resonate as such? Well, let Frederick Douglass quote a few of his words to resonate. This is his take. This is what he said. He says, "We all know who the rich man is in this country and who the poor man is or has been in this country. The slaves in the South have been the Lazaruses of the South, lying at this rich slaveholder's gates. But it has come to pass that the poor man and the rich man are dead." And by the poor man, he's talking about like the institution of slavery. "And the rich man are dead, for both have been dying in dying condition for some time. And the poor man is said to be somewhere very near in Abraham's bosom." Now, of course, in the context you talk about that, Abraham Lincoln's given this speech in like 1865. Of course, 1865, we had the Emancipation Proclamation that had been given, that had gone into effect in January of 1865. And incidentally, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free all blacks. The Emancipation Proclamation gave freedom to blacks who were held in slave territories. It would not be to the 13th Amendment that would abolish slavery. So in 1865, the President of the United States is a man by the name of who? He used to wear a top hat, a beard. Lincoln. And what was Lincoln's first name? Abraham. So as he's reading this and they're reading this, they're looking at it through like a lens of, wait a minute, he's in Abraham's bosom. So they're also thinking that we have a friend in the President of the United States, and that president's name is Abraham. So it's like a unique emphasis in terms of like a play on words, though not necessarily intended by Christ, but taken to heart by the slaves. So they would hear that and be able to be inspired by it. That, hey, we're in this plight, and Abraham will remember us. Now, another part then, of course, to look at and to consider is that the rich man who lived in luxury in the day of the parable, nothing is mentioned that he did anything to relieve Lazarus' condition. All right? Nothing is said that he sent something out there, but it also, nothing is said that he didn't send anything. So in other words, this is not a sin of commission, but it's more of a lack of omission. That he didn't do anything. One story, my experience that resonates with me, sometimes of maybe not doing something. I remember being asleep one night, and I woke up. I don't know if I woke up first or my wife woke up, but woke up, and it was like there's a shrieks of a woman hollering. And I heard this hollering, and then, after the fog cleared up, you were able to hear that she was hollering because it was domestic abuse. Someone was beating up this woman in the parking lot. This was a place that we had moved, didn't know it was maybe not the best part of town, had no idea, but found out that night that was not the best part of town. It's like, in some of those areas you drive one way and it looks really good, and you drive the other way, and it's like, okay, hold it. What's happening here? So we had driven in like the good way, but not driven in like the other way. So I would suggest if you're trying to look somewhere, drive every which way, like, north, south, east, west, north, east, southwest, like go every way to be able to figure it out and then, decide on the land on it. So we were there, and I heard this, and my reaction was, let me go out there and stop this. Now, of course, you could sit and, we can be the armchair quarterback. You don't know what may happen, right? I can go out there, I could get shot. I can go out there, and go out there, and she could turn on me. Sometimes when police are called out to domestic situations, they don't know what's going to happen. Like the abuser is sometimes, or the abused will sometimes turn on the police officers. It's like, I don't want him to go to jail. I just want him to stop. And there have been other instances at a different place in which I had the opportunity to be able to spring in action. We were coming into one place, and a neighbor was chasing someone that they broke in, so I jumped in, gave chase. We restrained the person till the police came, and so forth. So, like, something that's not necessarily unaccustomed. But this night, I heard that, and I wanted to go out, and she said, well, don't. So I ended up calling the police. And the following, and whether the police were able to come and to catch and so forth, I don't know. I know it stopped. But like the reality was, hey, that was an opportunity to do something. Like to step in and to do something. Now, I did something in terms of like reaching out to the authorities, but I felt and still feel that I could have done something. I could have gone out and done something. So whether I will be here, standing here today, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But when we look at some of the experiences in terms of black history, I think it was Dr. King who, I'm paraphrasing, said it is better to die a hero than to live a coward. Now, I didn't do something, but by not doing something, I did something. Lazarus, or rather Abraham, did not avoid something. He did not condemn the person, not do something that was evil, but he did nothing to be able to alleviate the suffering that was there. Then we look at Lazarus. We already identified that he lived in extreme poverty, and he had physical affliction and was laid there by others. And he's just outside the gate, so that it was almost a situation where Asher was aware of Lazarus's plight, but did nothing to be able to assist him. And we saw the reversal, that after death, their earthly positions are reversed, that Lazarus is comforted by Abraham and the rich man is tormented. And then in the explanation, we saw that Abraham, again, stated it off of this, not that one is getting it is not a pity party for Lazarus, like saying, poor Lazarus, you had it really hard in life, so therefore we're going to give you something. Like it's not a participation trophy. Like some sporting things, it's like a participation trophy, like we don't want anybody to be left out, so we're going to give something to everybody. It was not a participation trophy saying that you didn't have anything, so therefore we're going to get you something. No, it was simply saying something that was beyond. Again, to the thought that Jesus was challenging is really address that are you going where you think you're going? But the hyphen would be, you're going to where your character has prepared for. That was really what he was saying to them. It's like, okay, I'm not dealing with when a person transitions. I'm not dealing with the whole story of the afterlife. Let's go into your story of the afterlife. How you believe it will play out. And I want to present you with this reality. Are you going to go where you think you're going to go? Because I'll tell you where you're going to go. You're going to go to how you have lived in this life is where you're going to go in the next life. And so the pushback was, let us go, let's send someone in to come and to tell them of the teachings and of the miracle that has been seen, so that they might be persuaded. And his point there, again ties back into the bigger picture of the story. And the point being is that a hardness of heart won't change a person's mentality or their thinking. That's really what he was saying to them. So there will be a think about it from the perspective in which he presented, and hopefully challenging them to the thought of, is my mind so hardened against the teachings of Jesus that I am positioning myself to have an outcome that I will despise? That was what he was reviewing and challenging in their assumption. So I want to pull it forward then for us. For us, we think of then as the rich man, if we were maybe to apply the parable modernly to us, like to make the application to us, then we might say then we've been blessed with, of course, religious prosperity. We've been blessed with material prosperity. We've been given like a number of different things, resources and talents that are at our disposal. And I would challenge us then, well, what about the Lazarus then that is, outside the gate? Right? Just because, again, it has been that privilege that we've been given, it doesn't mean an outcome. And just because we have church resources, and just because we were born in the church, spent a number of years in the church, that we have accepted the truth or whatever verbiage we want to use to it, there's no guaranteed fixture in terms of an outcome unless there is character that goes along with it. So it says that the Lazarus, and I'll compare it then to just the overlooked sufferer who may be overlooked by us or the church, but they're not overlooked by God. Like they're all around. And sometimes we may see them and we make our own assumptions and assessments on them. Oh, these people don't blah, blah, blah. Oh, they're doing blah, we'll make those different judgment calls when in reality, we don't know. We don't have all the inner workings. We might see some pieces take place, but we don't know the actions of it. I like Proverbs when Proverbs talks about the fact that, okay, you might have mercy upon the person that steals basically because they're hungry. That doesn't mean that them stealing is okay, but it gives you an understanding of what's prompting them to do that, all right? That doesn't make the wrong right. But it gives us some understanding as, all right, we know they're not stealing just because they want to go in and see could they get away with it. They stole because they hadn't had anything to eat in 3 days. Now, it could be some other issues and so forth tied into it, but it gives like a bigger picture that is there. Consider the reversal of things. Again, eternal reality overturns earthly assumptions, and what appears secure may not be. So just because one enjoys a blessing here doesn't guarantee that one will enjoy a blessing there. Some of this, they just come in like kind of riding the coattails of others. And so we apply that then today. The reality of it is, again, that the blessings in that we have received don't ensure us of anything unless we stay transfixed with him. It is also interesting, too, that in the parable that the rich man, who I called Asher, when he needed help, he called out to Abraham. I found it interesting that he didn't call out to God. He felt by that calling out to Abraham was that lineage and that tie-in would be able to pull in. Our greatest friend that we can always call out to is Jesus. It's good to have other people that we can call out and reach out and to ask for help and call upon in moments of need. But the reality is there's no one that we can call out to that is quite like Jesus. He will hear our cry. He will hear the petition of the heart that it comes forth. And so we always must and should remember. We will consider then that God's word ultimately is the instruction that he's given to us. It is sufficient for us to be able to follow. But if our hearts are hardened to not be able to hear what's there, it won't change through something else. What the lesson was that if what I have given is not enough to be able to change, additional evidence won't change either. Like it doesn't matter. Like Gabriel could come down and talk. won't matter. If enough evidence is already given and the evidence is there, I will not receive it, then it becomes irrelevant. And so with the giving to the scriptures to us, then God has given to us enough truth. He's given to us enough light. He's given to us enough of the pathway that leads into salvation. So if we won't follow and accept that like a plain, thus saith the Lord, it doesn't matter what additional context is given. It doesn't matter if there's an additional, quote, revelation, because our minds are already affixed to that. So he wants then the heart to be in a position where it can still always be impressed. And so this is similar to what we read in Revelation chapter 3 and verse 22, that he says that whoever has an ear to hear, then let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. Because part of that hearing is, again, not listening solely, but it is listening and being able to obey. And so the assumptions then are being challenged, and with a heart then that is humble and a heart that is contrite, that yes, I have been given opportunity, but what am I doing with those opportunities? What are the choices and decisions that I am making today for where I want eternity to be? Consider in the book Ye Shall Receive Power, page 362. It says, the words that he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches, are repeated after these promises, and they are weighty with importance to the children of God. It is for our eternal interest to know and understand what the Spirit saith unto the churches, and we should search carefully for light and knowledge, that we may not be in ignorance of what God has commanded and promised in his precious word. We have souls to be saved or lost, and with the greatest earnestness we should inquire, what shall I do in order to obtain everlasting life? At the best, life is but short, and it is necessary that we should live this short life in harmony with the law of God, which is the law of the universe. We must have ears to hear and hearts to understand what the Spirit saith unto the churches. So when Jesus concluded his parable as such, he just left it there with a piece that if they don't hear Moses and the prophets, they won't be persuaded though one rose from the dead. Ironically, Lazarus, the real Lazarus, was risen or raised from the dead. And when he rose up, the people didn't rally around to, quote, to hear in that respect. They rallied around to hear messages of what happened after death. But as Lazarus will point them to the Messiah and was his resurrection spoke of God's glory, they plotted to put him to death according to the scriptures. Even Jesus himself, after he had risen from the dead on the third day, the people again hardened their hearts in rebellion against him, thus fulfilling what he said. It won't change unless your heart changes. And he left them with that to decide, because ultimately they were in charge of their own hearts. Ultimately, we are also in charge of our own hearts. Lord, because you have put us in charge, we surrender our authority, our decision-making to you. We recognize that we don't make the right choice. We recognize that by our choices and our actions, that many times we live as though we don't want to be a part of your eternal kingdom because of the habits and the choices and the decisions that we make. But remind us that how we live now is in preparation of how we'll live in eternity. We don't want to take for granted that because we've been blessed and put an opportunity in a position where we have light, that automatically equates to an expected end. But the only way that we can truly have the expected outcome that we desire is that we would let you be Lord and Savior of our life every single day. That we would let you mold and shape us to fashion us into the image of Christ, to raise us into a rich and holy atmosphere where the rich currents of your love may be able to flow through our souls. Where you can purge us of our dross and our earthliness and make us over into the image of the divine. I pray that you would help us to receive that gift and to be sympathetic and have a heart that goes out to those who are suffering. Help us that we might stretch forth a hand to be able to help where we can. We recognize that we cannot undo every particular injustice that exists. It would be impossible. But there are some things that we can do to be able to lend our voice and our influence. I pray that within our sphere that you would give us boldness and courage to be able to do so, and that you would bless us in our effort And I also pray again, God, that you might soften our hearts to your word, soften our hearts to the promptings of your Holy Spirit, that we would have ears to hear and eyes to see and heart willing to obey. We pray and ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.